The night unfolds softly over the rural outskirts of Ruwa, Zimbabwe. The air carries the scent of red earth and wild grass, the kind that hums quietly after a long day of heat. Crickets sing their endless song, and the distant chorus of frogs creates a rhythm as steady as breathing. There is something deeply peaceful about this land at dusk, a kind of silence that feels alive. The stars begin to pierce through the indigo sky, one by one, until the heavens are heavy with constellations that have watched over these fields for centuries. In the distance, small huts glow faintly with lantern light, and the world seems to rest in harmony. This is a place where time slows, where each sound, each flicker of wind through the grass, becomes a whisper from the earth itself. The villagers of Ruwa know these nights well. They have lived under this sky for generations, guided by its patterns, trusting its quiet constancy. Children sleep easily here, dreaming beneath mosquito nets while their parents talk softly outside. The land is dry but nurturing. It carries stories older than memory. During the day, the sun beats down with unwavering strength, and by night, the air cools into something tender, almost sacred. It's the kind of night that makes one feel that nothing could ever disturb this balance. Yet, as history would show, even the calmest skies sometimes hold secrets waiting to be seen. Far from the cities, far from noise and distraction, the African countryside exists in a rhythm untouched by modern chaos. Electricity is sparse, and so the stars claim their rightful place as the brightest lights in the world. When one looks up, the Milky Way is not a faint smear but a vast ocean of light. It is said that those who live close to nature see what others overlook, that the land itself speaks to them in ways that cannot be explained. The elders often tell stories of spirits that move through the night, of ancestors who send signs through the stars. These tales are not superstition here. They are part of life, woven into the understanding of existence itself. For the people of Ruwa, the sky is both a map and a mirror, a place where the divine and the earthly meet. In this tranquility stands the Ariel School, a small private institution surrounded by open fields and clusters of trees. During the weekdays, the laughter of children fills the air, their voices carrying far beyond the classroom walls. The school is modest, rows of simple brick buildings, a small playground, and a wide open area where children gather during recess. Teachers know every face, every name. There is a sense of closeness, of community, where life feels simple and safe. The children run barefoot across the sand, their feet hardened by the earth, their minds unburdened by the complexities of the outside world. It is a normal morning routine, until something shifts in the sky above. For now, though, this night before the unknown remains utterly calm. The land breathes. The trees sway gently. Somewhere in the distance, a jackal cries, and its echo fades into the hills. The world seems complete, unaware that the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary is about to dissolve. For those who would soon witness the event, this peaceful night would become a symbol of what came before. Before the questions, before the disbelief, before the fear and wonder intertwined. It was the last moment of absolute normalcy, preserved forever in the minds of those who would later say, "I remember how quiet it was, right before it happened." There is a timeless quality to the silence that comes before discovery. Humanity has always experienced such moments, the hush before the storm, the stillness before revelation. On this quiet African night, no one could have imagined that within hours, this serenity would give way to a mystery that would travel the globe, capturing the attention of scientists, skeptics, and dreamers alike. For now, only the stars know what is coming. They glitter in eternal patience, watching the small world below prepare unknowingly for one of the most extraordinary events in modern history. In the gentle dark, where the sky stretches endlessly and time feels slow, the story of Ruwa waits to begin. It begins not with sound or chaos, but with peace, with a calm so deep that when the unknown finally arrives, it will feel as if the universe itself has reached down to touch this quiet corner of the earth. And beneath that vast and whispering sky, the The children of Ariel sleep, unaware that by morning, their world, and perhaps the world's understanding of what lies beyond, will never be the same. The morning of September 16, 1994, began like any other at the Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe. The sun rose early, spilling soft gold across the dusty fields. The air was already warm, filled with the faint scent of eucalyptus and dry grass. Birds called from the treetops, and the children, dressed in simple uniforms, filed into their classrooms carrying notebooks and laughter. The day promised to be ordinary. Another lesson, another recess, another afternoon of play beneath the wide African sky. Yet, as the morning unfolded, something unusual would soon shift that sense of normalcy forever. Around 10 a.m., the teachers gathered inside for a staff meeting, leaving the children, nearly 60 of them, outside for their mid-morning break. The older ones watched over the younger, as they often did, and the open playground became a canvas of movement, children running, playing, and chasing one another through the red sand. Just beyond the school's perimeter lay stretches of wild bushland, dense trees, tall grass, and open sky. It was there, on the horizon, that the first flicker appeared. At first, it was mistaken for a bird, then perhaps a glint of sunlight reflecting off a distant airplane. But soon, more than one child noticed it. Small flashes of silver light danced in the air, metallic, deliberate, and silent. Some children pointed. Others laughed, unsure of what they were seeing. The shapes seemed to move in a smooth, purposeful way, not the erratic flutter of a bird or the familiar drift of a plane. They darted, hovered, and then, as several witnesses would later describe, descended toward a patch of scrubland near the school. What they saw next would imprint itself into their memories with haunting clarity. From one of the shining objects, small figures appeared, dark, thin, and strangely fluid in movement. The children described them as humanoid, yet not human, with large black eyes, slender bodies, and heads bigger than natural proportions. Their movements were almost weightless, as though gravity did not entirely apply to them. The air, the children said, grew oddly still. A sense of quiet awe, and for some, deep fear, settled over them. Some froze in place, staring. Others ran closer out of curiosity, stopping only when an inexplicable feeling washed over them. Later, several would describe that sensation as a kind of telepathic communication, as though the beings were speaking without words, sending emotions, images, or warnings directly into their minds. The message, many recalled, was about the environment, about the earth, about the dangers of human destruction. The beings didn't move toward the children aggressively. They simply observed, as though curious themselves, before vanishing back into the strange craft. Within seconds, the silver object lifted silently and disappeared into the sky. When the teachers returned from their meeting, they were met with a wave of anxious excitement. Dozens of children ran toward them, talking over one another, pointing toward the field, their faces pale and wide-eyed. "There was something out there," one said. "A man, not a man, with big eyes." Some of the younger children were crying. Others were visibly shaken, their voices trembling as they tried to explain. At first, the teachers assumed it was imagination, perhaps a story that spread too quickly among the kids. But when they walked to the edge of the playground and looked toward the treeline, many noticed that the area the children described seemed unnaturally quiet. The birds had stopped singing. Word spread quickly among the parents and staff. The headmistress, Cynthia Hind, a well-known UFO investigator in Zimbabwe, was soon informed and decided to interview the children individually. Her method was simple: separate them so that no one could influence the other's stories. What she found was extraordinary. Each child's account matched the others with remarkable consistency. Details of the craft, the beings, the sensations, all aligned too precisely to be dismissed as coincidence. Their drawings, too, echoed one another: silver discs, dark figures, large eyes, light. Each child seemed convinced of what they had seen, and none of them appeared to be fabricating it. The fear, the confusion, the awe, they were palpable. The event at the Ariel School quickly began to ripple beyond Ruwa. Local newspapers mentioned a strange sighting witnessed by schoolchildren. The BBC's Tim Leach, stationed in Zimbabwe at the time, caught wind of the story and decided to visit. He, too, left deeply affected by the children's sincerity. This was not a prank, he said later, but something that seemed to have left a profound emotional mark on each witness. They spoke not with the dramatics of storytellers but with the calm conviction of those who had seen something they could not understand. Even in the first hours after the event, a curious balance hung in the air, a mixture of wonder and fear. The children were excited, but they were also unsettled. Many of them, especially the younger ones, didn't want to return to the edge of the field. They described feeling watched, even after the craft had gone. Others reported dreaming about the beings that night, dreams filled with strange light and silent communication. Teachers comforted them as best they could, unsure of what to say. They were trained to guide children through the ordinary fears of life, thunderstorms, exams, darkness, but not this. As the sun began to set that evening, Ruwa once again descended into its familiar quiet, yet something had changed. Parents talked in hushed tones. Children refused to sleep with their windows open. Some described seeing flickers of light in the sky again, though none as close as that morning. The event had planted something deep within the community, a mystery that could not be explained, a question that would echo for decades. For the children who stood on that playground, life had split into two eras, before the morning of September 16th and after. That day, the peaceful routine of a small African school had become the center of one of the most compelling and haunting UFO encounters ever recorded. And though the sun rose again the next morning as it always had, the sky no longer felt quite as familiar. The universe, vast and silent above them, suddenly seemed closer, alive, aware, and watching. In the days that followed the sighting at Ariel School, Ruwa transformed from a quiet farming community into a place wrapped in awe and confusion. The children who had witnessed the strange craft could not stop talking about it. Their stories spilled out at home, at dinner, and in class, their words tumbling over one another as they tried to describe what they had seen. Some of the parents listened with concern, others with disbelief, but all noticed the same thing. Their children were not making it up. The fear in their eyes, the trembling in their voices, the uneasy way they drew pictures of what they'd witnessed. These things felt too real to be imagination. When Cynthia Hind arrived to investigate, she immediately began to document every detail. She brought tape recorders and notebooks, interviewing the children one by one under the shade of the trees behind the school. Each interview revealed something striking. The children, though interviewed separately, described the same scene. The shining silver object that had hovered near the field, the small beings with big heads and long arms, the black eyes that seemed to look straight into them. Some described feeling frozen, in place, unable to move, while others said they felt a strange kind of connection, as if thoughts were passing between them and the beings without words. The drawings they made were eerily similar: oval heads, spindly figures, and metallic discs suspended above the ground. There was a purity and consistency to the children's recollections that left adults unsettled. They weren't seeking attention or trying to impress anyone. Many were too young to even understand what a UFO was. Their stories were told with the raw honesty of children, full of confusion, emotion, and sensory detail. One student, a girl of about 10, said softly, "I felt he was trying to tell me something about the Earth, that we must take care of it." Another described feeling like time itself had slowed down. Several children said the beings looked sad, as though they carried a message too heavy for words. They didn't talk in language. Instead, they made the children feel ideas. These testimonies would later form the emotional heart of the case. The sense that something profound had happened that day, something that touched the children's minds directly. The human mind has always struggled to interpret the unknown, and for these young witnesses, that struggle was intense. Psychologists later noted the striking coherence of their accounts, pointing out that it's nearly impossible for a large group of children to maintain a complex lie under repeated questioning, especially when isolated. Their facial expressions, body language, and emotional responses were all consistent with genuine experience, not invention. Many appeared confused by their own fear, not hysterical, but quietly disturbed, the way someone might feel after seeing something real that doesn't fit into any known category. Soon, the incident drew the attention of a man whose name would become forever tied to the story, Dr. John E. Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist and Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Mack was known for his research into alien abduction experiences, not as proof of extraterrestrial visitation, but as a genuine psychological and spiritual phenomenon worthy of study. When he heard about the Ariel School case, he knew it was extraordinary. He flew to Zimbabwe to meet the witnesses himself, accompanied by a small team and recording equipment. His goal was simple: to determine whether these children were telling the truth or whether mass imagination had taken hold. Dr. Mack's approach was calm, compassionate, and deeply human. He didn't interrogate, he listened. He sat with each child individually, creating a sense of safety and respect. His interviews, many of which were recorded on video, remain some of the most compelling pieces of testimony in UFO research. In one, a young boy nervously fidgets before describing how the being's eyes felt like they were inside his head. Another, her voice trembling, says, "It was like they wanted to tell us something, but they didn't have mouths." When asked if they might have imagined it, the children shook their heads. "No," one said quietly. "I know what I saw." Mack noticed something striking. The children's emotions were not those of fantasy or play. They showed signs of genuine post-traumatic stress, the same physiological markers of people who had experienced something real but incomprehensible. They weren't excited to tell their story, they were relieved to be understood. Mack would later write that what impressed him most was their unwavering certainty that whatever they saw was not of this earth. And yet, he remained careful not to jump to conclusions. "We must honor the reality of their experience," he said, "even if we cannot explain it." Skeptics, of course, offered other possibilities. Some suggested that the children had seen a helicopter, or that mass hysteria had taken hold. Others argued that the cultural climate of the 1990s, filled with alien imagery from films and television, might have subconsciously influenced them. But none of those explanations could account for the precision and unity of their stories. These were rural children, many without access to television or pop culture. The descriptions they gave didn't match any known technology or fictional depictions circulating at the time. Their drawings and words carried a haunting simplicity that defied easy dismissal. As more interviews were conducted, the patterns deepened. Many children said they felt a sudden urge to care for the earth after the experience, as though the beings had impressed a moral message upon them. Environmental awareness was not a topic they had been taught, yet they spoke about pollution, technology, and the dangers of humanity's carelessness with striking clarity. It was as if their young minds had been tuned to a frequency that transcended their age. Dr. Mack found this particularly significant, not as proof of alien contact, but as evidence that whatever had happened had profoundly altered their worldview. In the weeks after the event, the children began to return to their routines, but something within them remained changed. Some became more introspective, some more anxious, others more curious about life beyond Earth. The teachers, initially skeptical, couldn't help but notice the transformation. One recalled later, they spoke of it like a sacred memory, not a story. The fear had given way to quiet reflection. For the children of Ariel, the beings in the field were not monsters. They were messengers, silent observers who had, for reasons unknown, chosen them to receive a vision of something greater. Psychologists studying the case years later found that nearly all of the witnesses continued to stand by their stories as adults. Their memories did not fade or distort over time, as false ones usually do. Instead, they remained steady, vivid, and consistent. Even decades later, when documentaries revisited the witnesses, Many spoke with the same calm conviction they had as children. Some wept as they recalled the event. "It's not about aliens," one said softly. "It's about what they wanted us to understand." The Ariel School incident, through these children's eyes, became more than a UFO story. It became a profound psychological mystery, an exploration of how the human mind perceives and processes the impossible. Whether one believes the children saw beings from another world or experienced a shared vision shaped by collective consciousness, one truth remains undeniable: their sincerity was real. Their fear was real. And their lives, from that day onward, would never again fit neatly within the boundaries of what the world calls ordinary. That morning in Ruwa became a mirror reflecting something deep within humanity itself: our longing to be seen, our fear of the unknown, and our fragile hope that perhaps, somewhere beyond the stars, there is intelligence watching us with eyes not so different from our own. The story of what happened at Ariel School might have remained a quiet local legend, whispered only among parents and teachers, had it not reached the ears of the media. Within days, what began as a small disturbance in a rural Zimbabwean town rippled outward, crossing borders and oceans. The world, still emerging from the early 1990s fascination with extraterrestrial life, found itself captivated by a story too strange to ignore: dozens of African schoolchildren claiming to have seen beings from another world. At first, local newspapers reported it cautiously. Headlines in the Zimbabwean Guardian and the Harare Herald spoke of "Children report strange object over school grounds." The tone was measured, almost dismissive, as though the editors themselves didn't quite know what to make of it. But reporters who visited the site quickly sensed something unusual. These weren't wild rumors or adult exaggerations. The witnesses were children, articulate, calm, and unwavering in what they described. Their testimonies carried a sincerity that challenged even the most skeptical journalists. Soon, local radio programs began discussing it, inviting callers to share their thoughts. Some dismissed it as hysteria, others as a sign from the ancestors, but nearly everyone agreed something had disturbed the calm of Ruwa. The first major international journalist to arrive was Tim Leach from the BBC. When Leach interviewed the children and staff, he found himself deeply moved. He expected giggling or contradictions. Instead, he was met with an almost sacred seriousness. Each child spoke with the kind of focused conviction that left little room for mockery. They believed what they were saying, Leach later admitted. Something powerful happened here. Whether from the outside or within their minds, I don't know. His reports, aired on BBC radio and later television, drew massive attention. Viewers around the world heard the quiet voices of African children describing silver objects, bright light, and beings with eyes that seemed to see inside them. It was unlike any UFO story the public had ever encountered. Almost overnight, the Ariel School became the center of a global conversation. Foreign journalists flew in from Europe, America, and South Africa, eager to capture the story firsthand. For a small rural community and used to outside attention, it was overwhelming. Camera crews roamed the school grounds, snapping photos of the field where it had all happened. Microphones were pushed toward children who only days before had been running barefoot in the dust, playing tag beneath the sun. Now, they were being asked to recount something that even adults struggled to believe. Despite the intrusion, their answers remained consistent. They did not exaggerate. They did not contradict. They simply told the truth as they remembered it. With the global spotlight came skepticism. Major outlets like Reuters, The Guardian, and The Times ran features questioning whether this was mass hysteria or cultural confusion. The fact that the witnesses were African schoolchildren gave rise to condescending interpretations from some Western commentators. The suggestion that rural children were more suggestible or imaginative. But others noted the quiet dignity with which the children described their experience, and how their stories remained unchanged under repeated questioning. The debate deepened. Could dozens of witnesses, from different backgrounds, speaking different languages, all share the same detailed hallucination? Meanwhile, in Zimbabwe itself, the reaction was more nuanced. In traditional Shona and Ndebele cultures, the concept of spirit visitors or sky beings was not new. Elders in nearby villages recalled stories of Njirozi, celestial messengers who sometimes appeared to deliver warnings or blessings. Some locals saw the event not as alien but as spiritual, a message from beyond, perhaps about the earth or humanity's growing disconnection from nature. Teachers and parents, torn between modern skepticism and ancestral understanding, didn't quite know how to interpret it, but they agreed that something had genuinely frightened their children. When the BBC footage aired internationally, audiences reacted in two distinct ways. Some were intrigued, struck by how genuine the children sounded, their voices trembling but certain. Others laughed, dismissing it as another episode in humanity's endless fascination with flying saucers. Television shows like Sightings and Unsolved Mysteries would later cover the event, adding dramatic music and grainy recreations that made it seem sensational, almost fictional. Yet underneath the media noise, there remained a quieter truth. Every adult who had met the children in person said the same thing: they were not lying. The media coverage, while spreading awareness, also created confusion. With each retelling, the details shifted slightly. Some reports exaggerated the number of witnesses, others downplayed it. Certain outlets introduced new experts who had never visited Ruwa but claimed to have explanations: weather balloons, group hysteria, even pranksters. The children, watching from afar, grew frustrated. They had lived through something they could not explain, and now the world was twisting it into spectacle. Teachers tried to shield them from the noise, but the damage was done. The Ariel School had become famous, and fame rarely tells the truth kindly. At the same time, the event began attracting attention from the UFO research community. Organizations in the United States and Europe reached out to local investigators like Cynthia Hind, requesting reports and video footage. Hind's interviews with the children circulated among enthusiasts, adding credibility to what was increasingly called the Ruwa encounter. Yet mainstream scientists remained wary. They pointed out the lack of physical evidence: no landing marks, no radar data, no photographic proof. To them, this was a story, not science. But to those who had seen the trembling faces of the children, it was impossible to dismiss so easily. What fascinated many observers was not just what had happened, but how the world responded to it. The incident became a mirror reflecting humanity's complex relationship with mystery. Western media, conditioned by decades of skepticism and science fiction, sought logical explanations. Local communities, shaped by spiritual traditions, were more open to interpreting it as a meaningful encounter. The same event existed in two realities: one that demanded evidence and one that accepted experience. Both were true in their own way. As coverage spread, psychologists began weighing in. Some proposed mass psychogenic illness, a kind of shared psychological response to fear or suggestion. Others pointed out that the children's calm demeanor didn't fit that model. Mass hysteria tends to produce panic, confusion, or conflicting stories, but the Ariel witnesses were consistent and self-assured. They don't seem traumatized in the usual sense, one analyst noted. They seem changed, as though they've glimpsed something profound. By the time the first international documentaries were released, the Ruwa incident had become one of the most well-documented mass UFO sightings in history. For the global audience, it was both haunting and humbling. The idea that something extraordinary had chosen not scientists, not governments, but children to bear witness. Yet as media attention faded and the world moved on, the story settled into a strange limbo, too detailed to dismiss, too unbelievable to accept. In that quiet tension between belief and doubt, the legacy of the Ariel sighting began to form. It was no longer just about UFOs or aliens. It was about perception, about truth, about how society reacts when confronted with something that does not fit its expectations. The journalists and investigators who stood under the bright Zimbabwean sun that week left with different conclusions, some skeptical, some transformed, But all agreed on one thing. Whatever had happened at that small rural school had left behind an undeniable sense of wonder. The world had taken notice. The children of Ruwa had spoken, and though their voices would fade from the headlines, their words would linger, gentle reminders that sometimes the most extraordinary stories come from the quietest corners of the earth, where mystery still has room to breathe beneath the endless African sky. When Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack arrived in Zimbabwe in late 1994, nearly a year after the Ariel School encounter, he approached the case with both curiosity and caution. Mack was already a controversial figure in academia, a Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer and a tenured professor who had risked his reputation by seriously studying people who claimed to have had alien contact experiences. Unlike many of his peers, he did not dismiss these individuals as delusional. Instead, he believed their stories reflected something profound about human consciousness, something that might point to dimensions of reality science had not yet grasped. For Mack, the Ariel School case presented an extraordinary opportunity. Here was not one person claiming a private encounter, but more than 60 children, all reporting nearly identical experiences, without apparent collusion or prior exposure to UFO culture. He recognized immediately that this could be one of the most important and revealing mass contact cases in modern history. And so, traveling thousands of miles from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Mack journeyed to the quiet rural town of Ruwa, not as a debunker or believer, but as a psychiatrist seeking to understand what these children had truly experienced. When he arrived, the Zimbabwean sun was high, the landscape dotted with acacia trees and red soil that seemed to shimmer with heat. Mack met with Cynthia Hind, the local UFO researcher who had already interviewed the children soon after the event. She shared her video footage, notebooks, and witness drawings. Watching the children speak, Mack was immediately struck by their composure, the way they described the beings not with excitement or fantasy, but with calm precision, as though recalling a vivid memory. He noticed how their body language changed when they spoke about the figure's eyes, a visible discomfort, a tension in their posture that suggested something deeper than mere imagination. Over several days, Mack conducted private interviews with many of the children, one-on-one, while a video camera quietly recorded. His method was gentle, therapeutic. He never led them with suggestive questions. Instead, he allowed their memories to surface naturally. Again and again, he heard nearly identical descriptions. A silvery craft, two small beings, one standing on the ground, another gliding above the surface. The creature's eyes were large and black, oval-shaped, extending toward the sides of their heads. But what disturbed the children most was not the being's appearance. It was the feeling that those eyes had communicated directly with their minds. As Mack listened, a pattern began to emerge. Several children said they received messages, not in words but through thoughts and emotions. They felt the beings were trying to warn humanity about technology, the environment, and the future of the planet. One girl said she suddenly saw images of trees falling and smoke rising into the air. Another said she sensed sadness from the beings, as if they were trying to tell her that people were hurting the earth. Mack found this deeply compelling. These were rural African children with limited access to television or global news, yet they spoke of themes echoing environmental and spiritual concern, messages that seemed far beyond their cultural and developmental context. In his field notes, Mack wrote, "What stands out most is the consistency of the children's accounts and the depth of their emotional engagement. They are not acting. Their experiences seem to have touched them at a profound, almost sacred level. Whether literal or symbolic, these encounters seem to convey a warning about humanity's relationship with the planet and with the unseen dimensions of reality." During his interviews, Mack also spoke with teachers and parents. None of the adults had seen the beings themselves, but they described how terrified the children were when they came running from the playground that day, some crying, some trembling, others staring blankly. The staff had tried to calm them, thinking it might be a prank or overactive imagination, but soon realized the fear was real. The consistency of detail among so many witnesses left even the most skeptical teachers uneasy. Mac's approach differed sharply from traditional UFO investigation. He wasn't searching for landing marks, radiation traces, or radar confirmation. He was studying experience, how the mind perceives and processes an event that doesn't fit into its known framework. He viewed these encounters as real, not necessarily in a physical sense, but in a psycho-spiritual one, something that occurs at the intersection of consciousness and reality. For the children, this wasn't just a story, it was a life-altering event that reshaped how they saw the world. After completing his field work, Mac returned to the United States with hours of videotape and dozens of sketches. He presented his findings at conferences, emphasizing that the children's sincerity and emotional coherence were undeniable. He argued that dismissing them as victims of hysteria or fantasy was intellectually lazy and culturally arrogant. If this had happened in London or New York, he said, we'd call it a major psychological or scientific event. But because it happened in rural Africa, it's too easily disregarded. In his lectures, Mac described how the encounter seemed to convey both terror and transcendence. The being's appearance frightened the children, but the communication, the silent, telepathic message, left many of them thoughtful rather than traumatized. Some reported that the experience changed their behavior. They felt more aware of nature, more reflective about life. One boy told Mac he began planting trees after the encounter, feeling a personal responsibility to care for the environment. Mac noted that the children's responses were remarkably consistent with those of adult experiencers he had studied. Initial fear followed by a shift in consciousness, a sense of interconnectedness, and a desire to protect the Earth. Despite the profound nature of his findings, Mac faced harsh criticism from his peers. Many accused him of endorsing delusions or blurring the line between science and belief. Harvard even conducted an internal review of his research, questioning whether his studies on alien abduction were scientifically valid. Mac defended himself, stating that his duty as a psychiatrist was not to judge the objective reality of an experience but to understand its subjective truth and its transformative impact. He often compared alien encounters to religious visions, near-death experiences, or shamanic initiations, phenomena that challenge materialist assumptions about the mind and the universe. For Mac, the Ariel case was a cornerstone of his argument, that these encounters, whatever their source, reflected an emerging reality, one that blurred the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual, between the seen and unseen worlds. He believed the children's messages about ecological destruction were symbolic of a larger awakening, a call for humanity to realign with nature and consciousness itself. To him, the Ariel event wasn't about little green men from space. It was about the evolution of human perception. Years later, footage of Mac's interviews resurfaced in documentaries and online archives. Watching the children speak, their eyes wide with sincerity, many viewers found themselves moved in the same way Mac had been. His calm, empathetic presence helped draw out their raw honesty, allowing the world to see what pure, unfiltered witness testimony looked like before skepticism and social pressure could erode it. Though Dr. Mac passed away in 2004, his work at Ariel remains one of his most enduring legacies. His approach bridged science and spirituality, giving dignity to experiences that the modern world often ridicules or fears. He didn't claim to know whether the beings were extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or psychological in nature. What mattered to him was the truth of the encounter within the human soul, the way it opened minds, changed perspectives, and reminded us that reality may be far vaster than our current understanding allows. The Ariel School investigation became not just a case study in ufology but a meditation on consciousness itself. Through Dr. John Mac's lens, it transformed from a strange event in rural Africa into a profound reflection of the human longing to connect, to the cosmos, to each other, and to the mysterious intelligence that may be watching us from beyond the stars. In the months and years following the Ariel School incident, the story began to ripple far beyond the borders of Zimbabwe. At first, it remained a local curiosity, covered by small newspapers and radio programs that treated it as a fascinating but isolated mystery. Yet soon, the account of 60 African children witnessing otherworldly beings caught the attention of international media. This was the mid-1990s, a time before social media, when stories still spread slowly through print, television, and word of mouth. But even so, this one carried a strange momentum. It resonated with people in a way few UFO encounters had before, partly because of the innocence of the witnesses, and partly because their testimonies felt unfiltered, untouched by the kind of adult interpretation that often colors such events. News outlets from the BBC, CNN, and Reuters began sending journalists to Ruwa. Among the earliest and most significant reports came from the BBC's Tim Leach, a correspondent based in Zimbabwe at the time. When Leach first heard about the story, he was skeptical. He had covered war, famine, and political unrest, and he didn't expect to find credibility in tales of aliens visiting a schoolyard. Yet when he arrived at the Ariel School and interviewed the children himself, something in their sincerity unsettled him. In his dispatch, Leach described their accounts as one of the most astonishing stories I've ever covered. The children did not contradict each other, did not embellish, and did not display the signs of collective fantasy or hysteria. They spoke with a quiet conviction that defied easy dismissal. Soon, major television networks produced short features about the event, airing clips of the children describing the beings they saw. These broadcasts reached millions. In the footage, the children spoke earnestly. They were standing by the trees. They had big black eyes. They didn't say anything, but I felt something in my mind. The simplicity of their words made the story even more haunting. Viewers around the world found themselves leaning forward, listening not as if to a ghost tale, but to a testimony, something that felt oddly plausible because it was so unadorned. For many who watched, the story stirred a quiet question. What if they really did see something? However, as the story spread, it also encountered the inevitable resistance of skepticism. Scientists, psychologists, and educators began to weigh in, offering rational explanations. Some argued that the event was a case of mass hysteria, a collective delusion sparked by suggestion. Others suggested that misinterpretation played a role, that perhaps the children saw a small aircraft, or even a local prank involving costumes, and their imaginations filled in the rest. Skeptics like Brian Dunning and Michael Shermer later analyzed the event, noting that eyewitness testimony, especially from children, is notoriously unreliable. They emphasized that without physical evidence, no photographs, no radar confirmation, no artifacts, the story remained anecdotal. And yet, even these rational voices could not fully dismiss what had happened. The consistency of the accounts, the emotional coherence, and the lack of motive for fabrication made the Ariel case stubbornly difficult to debunk. Unlike other UFO reports, which often rely on a single adult witness or ambiguous video footage, this event was rooted in dozens of young testimonies collected independently within hours of the sighting. The children had no access to one another's stories before being interviewed, yet their drawings and descriptions matched with striking precision. Journalists who visited Ruwa years later often described a lingering unease. The locals remembered the event vividly. Teachers still spoke of how the children were terrified that day, and parents recalled how their sons and daughters refused to go outside at night for weeks afterward. Some of the children, now grown adults, continued to stand by their experiences. In later interviews, some conducted nearly 20 years after the event, they described the memory as still vivid, unchanged by time. It wasn't imagination, one woman said softly. We all saw it. You don't forget something like that. For the media, the Ariel School encounter became a symbol of UFO credibility. It was not like the blurry lights caught on camera in Roswell or the fantastical abduction stories that filled tabloids. It was quiet, detailed, and consistent, an event that seemed to resist simplification. The fact that it occurred in Africa, far from the cultural centers of Western UFO mythology, also added a layer of intrigue. It suggested that these phenomena, whatever they were not confined to any particular culture or belief system. Governments, however, remained publicly silent. The Zimbabwean authorities never conducted an official investigation, though the case was known to local police. No government documents or classified reports have ever surfaced, suggesting that the event was largely treated as a curiosity rather than a potential threat. But within the broader UFO research community, whispers circulated that the South African Air Force and even international agencies such as the CIA might have taken private interest. At the time, South Africa was transitioning from apartheid, and global intelligence cooperation in the region was high. It was not inconceivable that Western agencies monitored the reports, especially given that similar sightings had been documented across southern Africa that same month. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, the Ariel case maintained an odd status, too credible to ignore, too strange to explain. It appeared periodically in documentaries, each time reigniting public fascination. The footage of Dr. John Mack's interviews became central to these retellings, his calm voice and empathetic tone serving as a bridge between scientific curiosity and spiritual wonder. Mack himself often noted how media coverage tended to simplify the event, reducing it to a UFO sighting by schoolchildren, while ignoring the deeper psychological and existential dimensions he believed it represented. Interestingly, the case also sparked debates within journalism itself. Reporters who had covered the story found themselves questioning their own beliefs about reality and truth. Cynthia Hind, who had documented many UFO events across Africa, noted how different this one felt, how it seemed to carry a weight that transcended the usual folklore. She lamented how Western outlets treated the African witnesses with subtle condescension, assuming that rural children were more prone to fantasy. Yet the opposite seemed true. These were children raised in a culture deeply connected to nature, where sky and land were living entities. They knew the difference between an airplane, a helicopter, and something that did not belong. The case also illuminated how collective witness events challenge traditional journalism. How do you report a story that is both profoundly sincere and utterly inexplicable? Some journalists approached it as a human interest story, others as a psychological phenomenon, and a few, more daringly, as possible evidence of non-human intelligence. Each perspective revealed more about human nature than about the beings themselves. Over time, as media attention faded, the Ariel School event transformed from breaking news into legend. But it remained alive in archives, documentaries, and online forums, gaining new audiences with each passing decade. Modern UFO researchers often point to it as one of the few cases that combine multiple levels of credibility: numerous witnesses, psychological assessment, independent documentation, and the absence of profit or publicity motive. The media's fascination eventually evolved into something else: reverence. Even hardened skeptics admitted the story had an undeniable poetry: children standing beneath the African sun, seeing something extraordinary that adults could neither confirm nor deny. In a world often divided by cynicism, the Ariel School encounter reminded people of a lost wonder, of the possibility that reality might be stranger and far more beautiful than we dare to imagine. By the late 2000s, the event had quietly taken on mythic proportions. It appeared in books, documentaries, and podcasts as one of the most credible mass UFO encounters in recorded history. To this day, the media's handling of the Ariel School case remains a lesson in humility, a reminder that sometimes the most astonishing truths arrive not with proof or certainty, but in the calm, unwavering voices of children who simply say, "We saw something, and it was real." In the years that followed the Ariel School encounter, a quiet but profound transformation began to unfold, not only among the witnesses themselves, but also across the broader cultural landscape. The event, once confined to a rural corner of Zimbabwe, began to take root in the collective imagination of the world. It became more than just a UFO case. It evolved into a modern myth, a story through which people explored their deepest questions about contact, consciousness, and humanity's place in the universe. As the children grew older, their memories matured with them, and their reflections took on new meaning. What had once been raw fear became introspection. What had once been confusion became an enduring mystery that shaped their sense of self and belonging. For the Ariel children, the passage of time did not dull the vividness of what they had seen. Many who were interviewed as adults still described the same beings, the same glowing craft, the same overwhelming sense that something had reached out to them. Their words carried a deeper tone, less wonder, more contemplation. Some described the experience as spiritual, others as a kind of initiation. One former student said, "It changed the way I see everything, life, the earth, and what we think we know." Another added, "It wasn't just seeing something strange, it was feeling something. Like we were shown a truth we're not supposed to forget." The psychological effects of the encounter were subtle but enduring. Dr. John Mack, before his death, noted that many witnesses seemed to carry a heightened awareness of the environment, an empathy for nature, and a deep mistrust of the technological destruction they felt the beings had warned them about. These sentiments echoed the themes that had emerged in Mack's other research, that alien contact experiences, real or symbolic, often leave witnesses with a profound ecological or spiritual awakening. In Ruwa's case, this awakening had occurred collectively, as if an entire generation of children had been given the same mysterious message at once. Cultural scholars and anthropologists later studied the Ariel School event as a crossroads of myth and modernity. They argued that the encounter fit into a much older pattern of human experience, one in which divine or non-human beings appear to convey warnings or guidance during moments of planetary crisis. In many African cultures, ancestral spirits and sky beings have long played roles as messengers between the physical and spiritual realms. Some researchers speculated that the children's experience might have been filtered through these cultural archetypes, that their young minds translated an incomprehensible event into familiar symbolic language. But others, including Mack, insisted that the experience transcended culture, that it was consistent with UFO encounters reported in vastly different societies around the world, from rural America to remote regions of Brazil and Papua New Guinea. Meanwhile, within global UFO and paranormal circles, the Ariel School encounter became a benchmark of credibility. It was frequently cited at conferences, documentaries, and in books as the most compelling close encounter case ever recorded. Ufologists pointed out that it lacked the usual red flags of hoaxes: no profit motive, no adult manipulation, and no evidence of mass hysteria. Even seasoned investigators who had dismissed other UFO stories as fabrications admitted that something about Ruwa defied explanation. The story became a unifying thread in the broader tapestry of UFO research, bridging gaps between skeptics, scientists, and spiritual thinkers. The event also began to influence art and media. Filmmakers, writers, and musicians found inspiration in its eerie tranquility and haunting innocence. The image of African schoolchildren standing beneath a glowing craft became a visual metaphor, a symbol of humanity's awakening to something larger than itself. Documentaries like Ariel Phenomenon, released decades later, revisited the witnesses, juxtaposing their childhood footage with their adult reflections. The film's tone was not sensational but contemplative, exploring how the encounter continued to shape their lives. Viewers were struck by the consistency in the witnesses' demeanor and the lingering sense of awe that had never faded. The story also began to enter the realm of collective spirituality. For some, it became a kind of modern parable, a reminder that contact, whether extraterrestrial or transcendent, often comes not to scientists or leaders but to the purest minds among us, children. Spiritual communities interpreted the being's environmental message as a cosmic warning, urging humanity to restore balance with nature before it was too late. Environmentalists even reference the case as symbolic of the Earth's cry for help, a moment when the universe itself, through mysterious messengers, tried to intervene. At the same time, skeptics and psychologists continued to debate the event, often using it as a case study in collective perception and belief formation. They argued that the cultural impact of the Ariel encounter revealed more about human psychology than about extraterrestrial intelligence. In their view, the event's endurance demonstrated how stories, once seated in emotion and mystery, can evolve into cultural truths independent of their factual basis. Yet even among skeptics, there was an acknowledgement that something extraordinary had happened, not necessarily in the sky, but within the human experience of wonder itself. The Ariel case also influenced modern UFO disclosure movements, particularly as governments around the world began to release formally classified files on unexplained aerial phenomena. Researchers revisited the Zimbabwe encounter as a model of credible witness testimony that could inform future scientific studies. When the U.S. Department of Defense and NASA began publicly discussing unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, in the 2020s, references to Ariel quietly resurfaced in articles and interviews. The case stood as a reminder that these mysteries had a human face, that beyond the data, there were people, often children, who had lived through something that defied understanding. The most profound legacy of the Ariel encounter, however, lies in its emotional and spiritual resonance. It endures not because of photographic proof, but because of the way it feels, the way it touches something primal in those who hear it. The story invites both skepticism and belief, both rational thought and deep intuition. It reminds listeners of the thin line between waking and dreaming, between the world we know and the one that might exist just beyond perception. In Zimbabwe, the old schoolyard where it all happened still stands. The trees have grown taller, the fields quieter. The classrooms have been repainted, the laughter of new children echoing where others once screamed in fear. Yet for those who remember that September morning, the place holds an invisible mark, a sense that the air there still hums with mystery. Some of the witnesses, now adults scattered across the globe, have spoken of returning someday, not to seek proof, but to reconnect with the strange, sacred stillness of that day. Ultimately, the Ariel School event has transcended its status as a UFO case. It has become a mirror of human curiosity, a story that continues to evolve as humanity itself evolves. For every skeptic who dismisses it, there is someone who sees in it a reflection of their own longing to understand what lies beyond the veil of ordinary perception. And for those who lived it, the encounter remains a touchstone, a quiet reminder that the world is far more mysterious and perhaps far more alive than we ever allow ourselves to believe. In this way, the Ariel encounter endures not as an answer, but as an open question, one that drifts through the collective dream of humankind, whispering softly through the years. What did those children truly see beneath the Zimbabwean sky, and what does it mean for us all? As years passed, the Ariel School incident began to evolve from a simple UFO sighting into something much deeper, a symbol of mystery, awareness, and transformation. The children who once stood in fear beneath the bright African sun grew into adults who carried that moment within them. For many, it became a quiet part of their identity, shaping how they saw life, nature, and the universe. Some described feeling a new sense of empathy for the planet, as if the being's message about protecting the Earth had planted a seed that never stopped growing. Researchers and artists alike began to revisit the case, each interpreting it in their own way. To some, it was a case study in mass perception, a psychological event triggered by suggestion or shared emotion. To others, it was a rare and genuine moment of contact with something far beyond human understanding. Documentaries, interviews, and studies kept the mystery alive, drawing new audiences who found peace and wonder in the story's quiet sincerity. Even decades later, the Ariel encounter continued to inspire conversation, art, and reflection. In classrooms, in film, and even in spiritual circles, it became a lesson in open-mindedness, proof that the unexplained can still carry meaning. Whether one sees it as science, spirit, or myth, the story stands as a reminder that reality is often broader than we allow ourselves to believe. And perhaps that is the most important message of all, that true discovery begins not with certainty, but with curiosity. The legacy of the Ariel encounter lives on quietly, carried in the memories of those who were there and the fascination of those who were not. As the witnesses grew older, their accounts barely changed. The same glowing craft, the same strange figures, the same unspoken message about Earth's fragility. Over time, their fear turned to reflection, and their confusion to calm acceptance. Some felt chosen to witness something sacred, while others simply saw it as a moment that reminded them how small yet connected humanity truly is. In a modern world facing environmental decline and uncertainty, the encounter feels almost prophetic. The being's warning about caring for the planet echoes like a soft reminder from another realm. Whether it was truly alien contact or a shared vision born of collective awareness, its meaning has endured. Humanity must evolve to live in harmony with its home. Skeptics still debate the case, calling it an illusion or a shared psychological event, yet few deny its emotional authenticity. The story continues to blur the line between belief and disbelief, between science and spirituality. Perhaps that is its true power. It invites both sides to wonder, rather than to conclude. And so, under the same vast sky that once held that silver craft, the Ariel encounter remains not just a mystery, but a mirror, reflecting our yearning to understand, to believe, and to connect with something greater than ourselves. Night settles gently over Zimbabwe, the same stars glimmering above the silent fields where the Ariel School once stood. Decades have passed since that strange morning, yet the memory endures, a quiet echo of wonder that refuses to fade. The children who saw the glowing craft are now adults, scattered across the world, carrying with them an experience that reshaped their understanding of reality. Some see it as a spiritual moment, others as a mystery beyond words, but all remember the same feeling, that something vast and intelligent reached out to them in peace. The message those beings conveyed still feels relevant today. In an age of environmental crisis and growing disconnection, their silent plea, to protect the Earth, to awaken to awareness, feels almost prophetic. Whether they were beings from another world or reflections of our own higher consciousness, their presence urged humanity to remember its responsibility to this planet and to one another. The Ariel encounter remains more than a UFO story. It is a reminder that mystery has purpose, that even without proof, wonder can awaken something deep within us. As the night deepens, the story whispers its gentle truth, that perhaps the universe has always been watching, patiently waiting for us to listen.